Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. A 5-star nursing home. Somerset House was located in a picturesque spot in Florida, 2 kilometers east of the Atlantic coast on the Gulf of Mexico to the west. And to the south, Havana was a stone's throw away. But it's unlikely that any of the residents of this quiet harbor wanted to go farther than the pool or the luxury course to play. If you have any energy left, it's golf. For many, this corner of paradise was the last stopping point between here and the next world. Anyone who could afford to spend $10,000 a month had long since traveled so far that they were hardly surprised by the seashore or the exoticism of Cuba. They ate, drank, relaxed on massage tables, smoked cigars. Sometimes they watched the news and became more and more convinced that perhaps it was a good thing they were not going to stay long in this steamy, gloomy world. Michael could afford the best accommodations in the place. He could choose between an apartment, a cottage, or a villa. Michael chose, of course, the villa. The price was a little higher than average, but he could afford more than that if he wanted to. In the same Florida, a cottage cost $350,000 for old people, not counting the monthly fee. But Michael was frugal in his own way, of course, all the more so because he was feeling pretty good at 69 and was looking forward to a long stay in that paradise. He was the owner of an advertising agency with offices in London, Prague, Tokyo, and New York. It was not even an agency. It was a huge corporation that spanned half the world with its web. 1. A poster on some bus stop in the center of the capital paid for Michael's month-long stay at Somerset House, and there would be enough such posters for a whole company. And that's if you don't count all sorts of third-party services that were more about politics than information. Business was booming, especially in troubled times, in which the lines between truth and untruth were blurred and any moral compass was erased. Michael was very tired. Tired of all those cold faces of tight wallets, of the unscrupulous rich men and simple fools, hoping, sooner or later, to join the endless ranks of the rich men as quickly as possible. It was not that he regretted the injustice that reigned around him, or that somehow his conscience was suddenly awakened. No, he was just fed up with life. Everything he had ever wanted to see, he had seen. Everything he had ever wanted to touch, he had touched. Everything he could taste, he had tasted. And now he did not want not to see, not to feel, not to feel. Now the surroundings that opened to him from the window of the villa were enough. A particularly acute desire to get away from business and away from the familiar world arose after the death of his wife. She exhausted her physical capacities first. 3 years ago, Michael had often cheated on her, never openly expressed any special love for her. But when she was suddenly gone, he found himself even more indifferent to everything that remained in the same place, even to the point of total rejection. He quickly drifted off, and his mind was completely absorbed in the past, the present, and even less interested in the future. He had a daughter, Adriana, who was born in his late 40s. He and his wife were in no hurry to have children. Michael married off his daughter at age 20 and made her unhappy because the daughter had other plans for her personal life before her marriage. But the firm had to be kept. To a man hardened to such a business, Adriana seemed more than indifferent to her father's life's work. She would surely ruin the business. Michael was absolutely certain of this. And Ethan, Adriana's unloved spouse, was a man of Michael's breed and would certainly not flush the agency's ruin down the toilet. I had to show my tough nature because I couldn't wait to get away from all the business and run away from the hustle and bustle to breathe in the freedom of the Atlantic paradise. He ensured a comfortable existence, not only his daughter, but also her 2 twin sons, born 8 months after the marriage. What else do they need to be happy? Michael accomplished his mission. Even if he didn't consider Adriana's opinion, he knew nothing was more important. Money did not exist in this world. Everything but them seemed to him a romantic drool. Philosophy for idlers and fools pretending to be righteous minds. Money solves everything. Period. Adriana visited her father in Somerset House every 2 years, when the need arose to travel on agency business to New York, rented a car, and drove all the way to Florida. Today was her third trip to see her father. He left them 6 years ago, when his grandchildren William and Liam were just a year old. The grandchildren never saw their grandfather after that. To them, he was almost a mythical character. But that was good. That's what Adriana thought. At least their grandfather wouldn't frighten them with his views on life. As long as their father was busy running the firm, hardly giving them the parental attention they deserved. Raising the twins fell entirely on her shoulders. And at least she was glad she did. Nothing else did not bring 28-year-old Adriana as much light as her favorite and beloved children. It was only for their sake that she endured such a life. That was the only reason she hadn't divorced Ethan. She had no feelings for him throughout their conditional life together. She understood that Ethan had not married her in the first place, but to the firm. And the children he no longer tolerated as if they were guests in their home for too long. The couple slept in separate bedrooms. They ate breakfast and dinner at different times and saw their nanny and housekeeper more often than they saw each other. Even at work, they tried to avoid each other once every 2 or 3 months. Ethan did visit his wife at night to perform his marital duties. Adriana was patient, not even trying to pretend to be happy with his visits. Ethan didn't seem to have much passion either, but it was something of a family ritual for him, so as not to become a complete stranger. In the huge 3-story townhouse, which had been a wedding gift from Michael, Adriana went to her father with a heavy heart. She couldn't forgive him for creating an artificial family unit based on his blueprints for an already sick society. All the more so because of a very unpleasant circumstance, which, remembering, Adriana every time began to weep with still, not gone pain. And now the thought of it brought hot tears to her eyes. So Adriana said aloud, slapping the steering wheel with both palms of her hands, "Easy, come on. You'll think about it later, not now." Phrase think about it. Afterward, she borrowed it from Scarlett in Gone with the Wind. Now she used it successfully in similar situations. Adriana had already entered the grounds of the boarding house. She parked the car in the parking lot by the neatly trimmed bushes and headed to the entrance, shining in the bright sun of the 3-story building. I had to check the visitor's log and get a pass to the area where the villas were located. Father was seated in a wicker chair on the open veranda. He wore a wide-brimmed hat over his eyes, and in his hands he held a glass of some unknown substance. Apparently, he had dozed off and had not heard Adriana come up on the veranda. Daddy, coming up close and touching him lightly on the shoulder. The guest spoke softly. Father flinched, lifted the brim of his hat with his free hand, and looked at Adriana with a hazy look, trying to understand who was standing in front of him. "My God," he muttered. Had 2 years really flown by? For whom? Like Adriana said, for me, personally, they crawled slower than a turtle. How was it in hell? Dad was kind of joking, but he looked serious. It was his usual way of always misleading his interlocutor. Ethan is in charge of hell. I try to devote all my free time to my children, as they wanted to come with me this time, to finally see the legendary grandfather in person. But the visas didn't work out. You never got an iPhone. No, Dad finished his glass and put it on the table. And I'm not going to. You don't want it, so don't pretend you want to communicate. All the more reason for me to rub my opinion in my grandchildren's faces. The conversation, as usual, had difficulty gaining momentum. The news Adriana had accumulated over 2 years was limited to 10 minutes of boring dialogue. With my father, on the other hand, little had changed. The days here were hardly different from one another. It was possible, of course, to have adventures. But Michael preferred from now on only the beaten track. It was enough for him that the sun rose in the east and set as it should in the west, and all the time in between was mostly spent in contemplation and drama, with a cigar in one hand and a glass of Coke in the other. Alcohol was not welcome here. Father made no friends at the boarding house, and in 6 years, he could never remember the names of the doctors, cleaners, masseurs, and volunteers who took care of him. It seemed to him that they changed every month, although most of the time that was not the case. This time, though, Adriana noticed a kind of unease and tension in her father's behavior. It was as if he had something important to tell his daughter, but he was hesitant to ask any leading questions. Adriana tried to pull the pain out of him, but did not manage to finish the conversation. They chatted for 2 hours. Just when Adriana was about to leave, Michael perked up, got up and said, "Wait a minute." Now he has left for the house, from where he reappeared a minute later. He held out his business card to Adriana. "Here you are. I've met someone here. You surprise me." Adriana couldn't help it. "I am seriously a daughter. Believe me, you might need his services. What do I need it for?" "Who is he?" Adriana read on the business card. "Noah, and his phone number below is not for you," the father explained to his grandchildren. "As far as I know, the kids don't have a bodyguard, and you need one. Don't be so careless. The kids are going out into the big world now. School, sections and clubs and things like that. A driver alone isn't enough for them. You're scaring me." Adriana frowned. Ethan settled things with the competition a long time ago. No one would dare infringe on his children. Or do I have something to worry about? Something's gone wrong. Where's the sudden concern when the occasion arises? The man proclaimed sternly. "It will be too late. I strongly recommend this man to you." "Who is he?" "Why him? There are plenty of security agencies." My father put his hand on Adriana's shoulder. "You know I wouldn't just recommend someone to you." "Jesus, Dad. You know how to ruin the mood. Now I won't be able to sleep until I see the kids again." "I'm sorry." Dad's back in his chair. "Are you thirsty?" "No, thank you. I'd better go before you give me any more riddles. I've got a plane to catch." "Yeah, sure. Well, I'll see you in 2 years. Finally buy a phone." "Bye. Bye." And Adriana, deftly running down the steps of the veranda, without turning around, hurried to leave. As she was checking in at the front desk, a young man came up to her, smiling, and asked if she was Michael's daughter. "Yes," answered Adriana. "And you?" "I am his doctor." Jacob introduces himself. "Do you want to talk about your father? Are you leaving?" "Let me walk you out." They went outside and headed toward the parking lot. "I suppose," the doctor continued, "Dad hasn't said a word to you about his condition. I mean, there's something wrong with him." "I thought so." Jacob shook his head. "A very stubborn man. I don't know why he didn't say anything, but I think it's my duty to tell you. A week ago, he had a heart attack. A heart attack. God, it's so serious. Your father's a strong man. He recovered pretty quickly, but the test showed that he may not be able to take a second one. Just keep that in mind. You don't visit him that often, and he's an opponent of all modern communications. So if anything happens, I'll have to contact you myself, won't I? I only say this so that my call won't come as a surprise to you. I hope, of course, that it won't happen anytime soon. But still, yes, Adriana nodded. Thank you for letting me know. I'll keep the best of luck in mind. Adriana said Jacob with a sad smile. Goodbye, and thank you for taking care of your father. Adriana got into the car and closed her eyes. Well, she thought, something like this was bound to happen sooner or later. Was it something her father had never dared to tell her about? Or had something else happened that caused his heart attack? He said nothing about the main thing, but spoke in all seriousness of some bodyguard. Strange. Adriana looked at the card again, just the name and the phone number. She didn't understand anything else. Just a coincidence. But her father was not the kind of man to attach importance to unimportant things. She would have to contact this Noah anyway. Maybe he knew something that her father was not telling her. Adriana started the engine and drove slowly out of the grounds of the boarding house. She had to hurry to the airport. All the coldness that had settled in her relationship with her father was not a characteristic of her or his. Or rather, it was in part. Michael was, of course, a man hard on his loved ones. But in Adriana's case, The reason lay in a bitter resentment that the woman had never been able to finally forgive her father. At 18, in her first year at university, Adriana fell in love with a boy named Mason. He went to a different institute and was 5 years older than her. Their mutual feelings were full of sincere passion and promised to develop into something more. If Michael hadn't intervened when Mason graduated from college and found a job in his field, the question of marriage would have come up in earnest. He proposed to Adriana, which she happily accepted, believing she was old enough and independent enough not to need her parents' blessing. Her mother, of course, was aware of her daughter's serious intentions and was, in general, not against it, but understanding the reaction of her spouse. She advised Adriana not to rush to give what is called time to her feelings and unfavorable circumstances for such an important step. By profession, Mason was a tax agent. The earnings in the early years promised to be unbelievable, but they would pull through even without her father's support. Adriana had only 3 more years of college left, but had Michael already woven Adriana's fate into his own plans in those plans? There was no place for random people, much less people like Mason. He even met Adriana's suitor. He didn't want to. The girl declared a boycott. She locked herself in her room and stopped attending lectures. It even went so far as to go on a hunger strike when the terrible news reached Adriana. Mason had drowned, celebrating on the banks of the river with friends on his first vacation. Adriana could not believe it. First of all, she knew that Mason was an excellent swimmer, born in a town near the river before his family had moved to the capital. In the second place, he never drank, so the tragedy that had occurred could be blamed on alcohol. Adriana emerged from her seclusion and rushed to learn the truth from the Mason family, but was met only by the grieving mother of her missing son. But it turned out that this was no cruel joke, but a nightmarish reality. Mason's body, however, had not yet been found. The search continued for 2 weeks, but was inconclusive. Adriana hoped that some monstrous absurdity had occurred, that Mason was alive, but for some reason unable to get in touch. She stayed on the phone time after time, looking through messages and maybe missed calls. But the last message from her lover was his regret that she wouldn't be able to join the company the day Mason disappeared. She was kicking herself for not spitting on her pride that time and leaving the room to see her boyfriend. She could have spit on her father. She could have run away from home altogether, instead of hiding in the very corner of the house like a mouse. But now what's there to complain about to herself? Everything had already happened, and time cannot be turned back. But it happens. People lose their memories all of a sudden. You swim out on the other side of the river. Bam! Forgot his name and where he was. It had been Adriana's fantasies until the spring, when Mason's body was found, quite by accident. He had been buried in a closed coffin. Adriana said there was practically nothing left of the guy's face. All this so drowned out Adriana that she stopped being aware of herself for 6 whole months. Turned into a somnambulist, stopped being interested in what was going on around her, dropped out of school, cut all ties with her buddies, almost never spoke to my father. Just in that period of time, her mother died. Adriana, like a doll, was taken somewhere, introduced to people who meant nothing to her, among whom was Ethan. Very soon their wedding took place. The girl did not think anything of it. She didn't care what was happening to her. The wedding. All right, so be it. Ethan had gone to great lengths in the first months of their life together to awaken Adriana from her slumber, and to make her feel at least somewhat accepted, because the whole wedding thing felt like some kind of violence on his part. But Adriana woke up only when she gave birth to twins. Everyone was worried that in such a distraught state she wouldn't be able to give birth. But Adriana did. A month early, though. But that's okay. The boys came into the world quite healthy and didn't cause the doctors any special worries. It was Adriana who had to worry. The antidepressants, which could now be taken, had done their job. And the woman sort of coped with her lurking in the depths of her heart's sadness and began a new life. All her strength and all her love directed toward her sons. And yet she continued to think about Mason. And the more she thought, the more certain she became that he had died through no fault of his own. He'd had help for sure. And Michael was the prime suspect in this. His father understood what it was. Without saying a word, accused his daughter. But to justify and dissuade her was not going to. Since then, and lay between them this gap, which in 8 years almost not a meter less. My father's departure for Florida was partly the result of this tension. Adriana, of course, had no facts on hand with which to convict her father of the crime. Could she be mistaken? Maybe the father had nothing to do with it at all. Confidence had become less firm over the years, but the coldness in the relationship had never moved a degree. Adriana returned home, shattered and preoccupied. She was now concerned about 3 things. First, the children and their safety. Then the strange business card, Noah, and finally, the state of affairs in the New York branch of their agency. It was possible that all 3 of these things were connected to each other by the same thread. Adriana had previously suspected her husband of an untidy financial scheme behind the backs of the board of directors and Michael himself, who, despite his outward detachment, remained the controlling shareholder. Adriana, from her position, was somewhere between a manager and a courier. She had no direct access to the financial records, but what she did have on hand was enough to realize that Ethan was taking quite a risk with his father's firm, trying to evade a huge chunk of taxes. This began 2 years after Michael had gone into hiding in Florida. Apparently, he did make a mistake in Ethan, trusting him with all the main levers of control. Well, on the one hand, it was good to know that even such a man steeped in rationality was capable of blundering. But on the other, it wasn't that Adriana felt sorry for her father or his advertising monster. It was just that it was unpleasant to realize that she was part of this filthy machine. To her father, of course, she said nothing about her suspicions. It was the way he had chosen to trust Ethan. At the same time, he dethroned her in the company of this unloved stranger in person. Deep down, she even wished that this Tower of Babel would collapse and destroy under it all these parasites who had sucked on her in an irrepressible thirst for flesh. She would live with or without the firm, with Ethan or without him, as long as her son stayed by her side and nothing happened to them. Maybe her father somehow also guessed about the state of the agency, and so he was concerned about the safety of his grandchildren beforehand. After all, if this tower lapsed, hordes of envious and resentful competitors with all their private military companies and squads of unscrupulous lawyers would swoop in. For this fact, peace will start a real war. The children, thank God, were all right. Vacation was beginning, the first summer vacation of their lives, which suddenly puzzled them for a whole year with a bunch of new responsibilities. They'd been dreaming so hard, and Ethan Adriana caught him in a mood that was unusual for him, although it seemed a little feigned to his wife. How was the trip? He asked when they gathered for dinner for the first time in years. How did my father usually go? Adriana shrugged, very tired. I could use a vacation right now, too. The children, rattling their plates with their spoons, laughed. Adriana's heart felt a little better. You know, Ethan said excitedly, I have a suggestion. And what is it? Why don't we go to Dubai for a week? Adriana was surprised. The children froze, staring at their father. William, Liam. He turned to them. Ethan, how would you like to go to the sea? The boys synchronously threw down their spoons and raised their hands in the air, signaling their delight and their unquestioning consent to the adventure. So far, they had never left the capital, and they had seen the sea only on TV. We'll take a private flight, Ethan added. Without all this fuss, without unnecessary passengers, surrounded by the most friendly staff in the world, to get away from the megalopolis, which was beginning to heat up its concrete pipe. Gaining strength by the heat would be wonderful. But why Dubai? Adriana thought to herself, it must be even hotter there now. And everything artificial around is not real, aimed solely at impressing the human imagination with the level of technology and comfort unthinkable 50 years ago in the middle of the desert. Adriana would love to go to the countryside, to Ploz, for example, a small town lost on the banks of the river, which otherwise might be turned into a resort, but fortunately has preserved its pristine comfort. And almost deserted. Even at the height of summer in Ploz, Adriana was twice, once with her father as a child, and the second 2 years ago on the business of the company. And this town impressed her, though compared to the times before, as the old-timers had told her, it had become somewhat dilapidated, becoming more of a picture and losing its former content. But Adriana remembered that on her second trip, she had thought of buying a house somewhere on a hill overlooking the river and staying here forever. Oh, how nice that must have been. Quiet, grace, no fuss, and all around is nature, praised once by Leviton himself. And children would probably like it there. They grew up simple, not spoiled, and loving the natural beauty of the world. Adriana knew that by the third day Dubai would disappoint them, but there was certainly no choice now. Stutter at this point on Plios, and Ethan would look at her like she was crazy. He was of a different kind altogether. They packed quickly, taking only a couple of suitcases with the essentials. On the plane, Adriana slept lulled by the muffled humming and delighted exclamations of her sons, who saw the earth from such a height for the first time. A white limousine of incredible length met them at the airport and took them to the Burj El Arab Hotel. This building was a landmark in Dubai, tacitly rated by journalists as an unprecedented 7 stars. Seated 280 meters offshore on an artificial island, it resembled a huge 321-meter-high sailboat, inside which were the world's most expensive suites overlooking the ocean on one side and the city dotted with high-rises on the other. Their room was 2 stories high. Downstairs, there was a large common room with full-width panoramic windows, sofas, tables, carpets, and Arabian-inspired design frills. On the second floor were the bedrooms and 2 spacious bathrooms, one of which had a jacuzzi in the shape of a round marble pool. Adriana learned from a promotional booklet that the builders used 8,000 square feet to decorate the interior throughout the hotel. 22-karat gold leaf. But why would they have spent so much money on this room? Adriana, bewildered Ethan has never been known for extravagance. And now, all of a sudden, it was a trick. William and Liam's eyes were dazzled by what they saw. From the first seconds, they were running around the room, exploring every nook and cranny of it. So Adriana became afraid that in all this excitement they will break their heads, stumble on one of the stairs, or crash into some of the objects. However, the flight, the change of climate, and the excitement by 2 o'clock in the afternoon did tire them out. They became lethargic and began to yawn. Adriana took them dejectedly to the bedroom and put them to bed. When she came downstairs, she found Ethan at the window with an ashtray and a cigarette in his hands. She, too, felt tired, yawned, shook her head, and walked over to her spouse. The contrived cheerfulness and lightness that had lately emanated from Ethan had now disappeared from his face. He was tense again, his brow furrowed with wrinkles, and his movements became nervous. "Something is wrong?" Adriana asked him. He was silent. He looked at Adriana with a detached and at the same time searching look. "You look pale. What is it?" "I'm tired. I want to talk to you about something," he said with a serious look on his face. A chill ran down Adriana's spine. "What about?" "About William and Liam." "Well," Adriana thought, "here we go." "I never understood." Ethan continued. "What are their characters like?" "What kind of characters?" "Not like mine at all." "Wait, look, this serious. There's nothing of me in their outward appearance, either. I always thought they were just like you. But you don't have as much romance and simplicity as they do. I certainly didn't know you close to the other. You were before that incident with your ex." Ethan grimaced, as if he were talking about something that disgusted him with Mason. Scared of the name she'd said out loud, she asked Adriana, "I don't know what it's like. I guess you haven't seen yourself from the outside. I didn't marry a human being. I married your shadow." All this time, I've been trying to figure out what you really were. But I couldn't. I guess that part of you died a long time ago. What's the point of all this talk? Ethan, I don't understand. Ethan looked even more closely into Adriana's face. Maybe you really don't understand. Just like I don't understand you. Anyway, I got tired of having doubts and decided to take a DNA test that Liam and William weren't my children. That's how Adriana couldn't believe what she was hearing. Not that the boys might have another father. Not that Ethan had secretly decided to find out. As a woman, of course, she should have sensed that all women, at least in the back of their minds, understood who their beloved children were born to. But at the time, she was not fully aware of herself. She had been living in a fog for a year and a half, and Ethan's words were now a revelation to her. I tried to say something to Adriana over and over again, lost in thought. I couldn't believe it. I shook my head, Ethan too. I turned away and lit a new cigarette with his heavy sigh. The ash from the ashtray sputtered and fell in gray flakes onto the white carpet. A week in Dubai, under the new circumstances, was torture itself. Now it was clear why Ethan had gone to such expense. Apparently, he wanted to soften the news for Adriana. Or maybe he was going to turn the whole 7 days into such torture for her. He was afraid that in the heat of the moment she would leave the house if they stayed in the townhouse, and took the kids with her. What was on this man's mind? To Adriana, it remained an unsolvable mystery. Excited Burj Al Arab people were everywhere. Most of the tourists were here, like Adriana, for the first time. Brutal ladies' men who happened to be worth a fortune. Their frivolous girlfriends, nailed by the headwind, were ready to rush away again at any moment. Away, rich old men, pretending that they have seen a lot of such things in their lives and regretted the money they spent on all this nonsense. Even the Arabian sheiks, for whom such a life had long been customary, tried to give a majestic indifference to their appearance, though in their hearts they must have rejoiced like children. Everywhere there was pretense and falsehood. Luxury pressed every cell of the being, and the discrepancy between what was received and what was spent turned inside out. And Adriana was even more irritated by it all. And the worst part was that she had to put on a mask too. Pretend to be happy for the children's sake. The boys shouldn't have suspected a trick, because only such innocent souls are capable of taking all these false decorations for granted, finding in them things that escape adult scrutiny. It was their first real vacation, and Adriana stretched a smile on her face, holding back the tears that came to her eyes. She tried to have as much fun as she could. And at night her face hurt, and the roots of her hair dug into her head with red-hot needles. It was as if they were directing their efforts not outward but inward, trying to reach her brain with their poisonous stings. She was afraid to snap and throw a tantrum. Any rebuke from Ethan, any careless word of his, would have been enough. His inappropriate touch in this situation. But luckily there were 4 bedrooms on the second floor. There were 4 bedrooms on the second floor. They did not cross paths with each other at night. It was obvious that Ethan, too, was anxious to get this stupid vacation over with. He probably could not have imagined that a conversation with his wife on the first day would make such a distressing impression on him. In 7 days, he and Adriana had exchanged only a few words. Most of the time, they were silently indulging in the usual tourist pastimes of Liam and William. Thank goodness, they did not pay much attention to their father. They had long been accustomed to his stern appearance and taciturnity. They would have been more surprised and alarmed if he suddenly began to show an uncharacteristic interest in them. The torture was over when the plane landed at the capital's airport, and now it was possible to do real things, to take off the mask and become yourself. And the first of the real ones was the desire to call the mysterious Noah and arrange a meeting. Still, Michael was definitely guessing about something. Adriana had no doubts now. She still didn't understand how a hurricane born somewhere far away threatened her boys. But the building of protective walls had to start right away. At the first opportunity, Adriana dialed the number on her business card, but no one picked up at the other end. Not even an answering machine voice came through. Then she dialed again and again, but to no avail each time. It was Sunday on the calendar. Maybe on Sundays this Noah preferred to close herself off from the world. What on earth was she so worried about? She'll call tomorrow if she has to. She'll call incessantly. Sooner or later someone would have to answer. Since during the day Adriana did not even get a nap, near midnight she just collapsed on the bed and immediately fell asleep in a deep, black, and fear-filled sleep, awakened by the unpleasant sliding of someone's hand over her body. She opened her eyes and saw the excited face of Ethan, who had climbed into her bed and was running his hands over her breasts and thighs. She jumped up and began to kick away awkwardly, hitting the corner of the nightstand with her elbow. Adriana cried out in pain. A hot, wet palm immediately covered her lips. "It was me, calm down. What do you want? Why are you here? I'm your husband," she breathed, her breath mingling brandy fumes and tobacco smoke. The man spoke in a voice almost unfamiliar to me. "I didn't call for you." I kept pulling myself out of his embrace. "Adriana, you have completely lost your mind. Get away from me. What's the matter with you?" Ethan raised his voice. Grabbing her shoulders tightly, he pushed Adriana firmly into the mattress and hovered over her like a rock. "I want to have a son too," he said. "You see, my own son. We have to do it with you. I can't do it any other way. I don't want other people to have everything." "What people? What are you talking about? It hurts me. You know what I mean. You've got to use your brain. Wake up. I can't live like this. I can't do it now. I'm always surrounded by strangers." You'll come out of Adriana's eyes with tears of pain and despair. "I'll accept the fact that you don't love me and never did. So let it be that I don't care. I will even get used to your children. I won't say a word to them about what I told them in Dubai. I promise you. But I need someone close to me too. I'm tired. Tired. Adriana. Adriana." Ethan's wet lips roamed chaotically over Adriana's face. She was almost fainting from the horror and inconceivability of what was happening. With a last effort of will, the woman managed to free herself from the clutches of the distraught Ethan. She jumped out of bed and staggered backward, stumbling over chairs and clothes scattered on the floor toward the exit. But Ethan, like a beast of prey, sensed his prey slipping away. He too jumped up and tried to drag Adriana back to the bed. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but she was afraid that the screams would be heard in the nursery and resisted. As much as she could in silence, Ethan became completely enraged, beginning to realize that he wasn't going to get anything out of his wife that way anyway. Finally, he let her go, froze for a second, and then with all his might he punched her in the nose with his fist. Bright sparks flashed before Adriana's eyes. She gave a gasp and tumbled backward, fumbling for something to hold on to. But her hands couldn't find any support. She hit her head on the nightstand, and her eyes finally went black. She woke up around 4 in the morning. It was getting lighter outside. The bedroom window was slightly open and cold jets of wind were blowing into the room. Adriana lay in her bed, covered by a blanket. Her head hummed in the area of her nose, as if her heart was beating, reverberating throughout her body. With a dull ache, she touched her hand to her face. God, the pain immediately became sharp. What a bastard. It went through her head. Had he broken his nose? Adriana tried to get up. Her eyes darkened as she fumbled for her slippers with her feet. She stood up carefully. Nothing, it will live. In the old woman's way, she strode into the bathroom. She looked in the mirror. Yes, her nose was broken. A centimeter from the bridge of her nose. A thin streak of blood. Strangely, her face didn't swell up as much as she expected it to. And what would she tell the children? How would she explain? Walking, slipped, fell. How silly. Adriana even grinned and grimaced in pain again, surprised at her outburst of cheerfulness, and felt that she, against her better judgment, made herself feel better. Now it was all out in the open. Ethan had revealed his monstrous nature in all its unsightliness. No need to guess and doubt from now on. She knew for sure now. The children must be protected. And it wouldn't do any harm to think of her own course of action, either. Since last night she had ceased to be a wife. All that's left to do is to make it visible. Temporary thinking while we have it. First of all, William, Liam, and Noah cleaned up and cleverly disguised the wound under a layer of makeup. Adriana came out of the bedroom. It was a little early to wake the children. It was 7:32. They must be exhausted from the flight. The house seemed completely alien and unnaturally cold. Not a sound could be heard. After a minute in the ominous silence, a small bell rang. Somewhere in the dining room area, a cat named Tisha was running. Adriana went to the sound. Tisha was lying near an empty bowl, muzzle resting on her front paws and wiggling her ears. Adriana stroked her, put food in the bowl, and decided to make a stronger coffee for herself. It made her really want to smoke. She hadn't smoked since she was a student, and she had never felt this craving before this morning. But now it had become unbearable. Adriana finished her coffee and searched the dining room, then the veranda where Ethan usually smoked, but she couldn't find any cigarettes. She threw on her poncho and went out into the yard, hoping to see a gardener or someone from the service, so she could snatch a cigarette from them. There was only a car in front of the house. A minute later, their young driver got out and headed toward Adriana. On the way, he stumbled twice. "Good morning, Adriana," he said. His eyes were running confused, unable to concentrate on one thing for long. "Hello, James." Adriana greeted him. "Did you want something?" "Yes." The boy wrinkled his feet. "Here's the thing. Ethan told me to talk to you about it. Said it was up to you to decide." "What issues?" "I'm leaving, Adriana." "You're leaving where?" "I mean, I'm quitting." "Oh yeah. Did something happen?" "Well, it's a family emergency. It's just urgent, preferably today. But I can wait till tomorrow." "I'm so sorry. It was unexpected." "I see. You smoke what? Do you have a cigarette?" "No." James even patted his pockets for clarity and looked at Adriana with surprise. "So what do you say?" Adriana sighed heavily. In principle, it was for the best. She wouldn't have to explain to that bastard Ethan where the new driver came from. James had sent her himself. Just wish Noah would answer her this time. "So what?" James shrugged Adriana off. It was the right thing to do. "I dare not delay the money and take the documents from the accountant." "Thank you." As they say, for the service, James also sighed in relief. "I've never seen you with a cigarette," he said in a cheerful voice. "Do you smoke?" "I just felt like smoking today." "I'll run out and buy you one, if you like." "What kind do you smoke?" "I don't know. Buy something lighter. If it's not too much trouble, I'll bring you the money." "Don't worry. I don't need any money. I'll be right back." James ran back to the car, and a minute later disappeared around the corner. He came back really quickly and brought back 3 packs of different brands. Adriana thanked James, went out on the veranda to have a smoke, and picked up her phone. The smoke calmed her down a bit. Her head felt like it was filled with absorbent cotton. She looked at the clock again, 8:30 in the morning. She dialed Noah. Yes, she heard a confident man's voice on the other end. "Hello." Adriana exhaled into the receiver after blowing out her cigarette. "It's Noah. That's the one." "Hello. My name is Adriana. Your card was given to me by Michael. You still provide bodyguard services." Noah paused on the phone. A loud car horn was heard. "What an asshole," the man cursed. "Excuse me." "I'm sorry." Grinned slightly at the interlocutor. "I wasn't talking to you. I'm driving now." Some lady got her right and left mixed up. "Do you need a bodyguard?" "Not me. My kids are 2 7-year-old boys." "You're also the driver." "You heard me." "Yes, I drive and guard." "Then we can meet and discuss the details of the job." "Yes, we can. I can come over right now if it's convenient for you." "How far out of town are you?" "No, near the highway." "Well, I'm not very far, about 15 minutes away." "That's great." Adriana got excited. "Then I'll give you the address, and I'll wait for you." "All right, talk." 20 minutes later, a silver Toyota drove into the gate. A tall man of about 35 stepped out of it. It was rather difficult to determine his exact age, as he was somewhat aged by his heavy gait and disfigured by horrible scars. His face, even his skull, completely devoid of hair, bore the marks of a deep incision. But despite his intimidating appearance, Noah was strangely endearing to Adriana from the first. There was something soothing about him, and some of the way he moved and gestured. His intonations and expressions seemed as if she had seen and heard them before, as if she had met an old acquaintance. They sat in the dining room and drank coffee. Adriana smoked one cigarette after another without stopping, trying to calm her wobbly imagination. "How do you know my father?" Adriana asked. "Michael, we met about 3 years ago on business matters. I was on a business trip to Florida. That's why I'm asking," Adriana clarified, "because it's not common for him to trust people he doesn't know, if he trusts anyone at all. And you were the one he strongly recommended." Noah smiled at the edge of his lips. God, even his smile reminded Adriana of something already painfully familiar. "I suppose," the man shrugged. He had his own reasons. "We've never met before." Suddenly, Adriana blurted out. Noah barely noticed that he was awake. "You know," he said, "I've had a lot of contact with all kinds of people in my time. Before I concentrated on security, it's possible that we might have met somewhere. What was your job before that?" "A detective of sorts. In fact, a long investigation led me to Somerset House. Michael helped me a lot on that case." "And your face, does it frighten you?" No, I'm sorry. I suppose it's unseemly of me to ask about such things. Believe me, it's a great advantage for a bodyguard to have a face like that. Often, a conflict can be resolved before it has time to go into the hot phase. And the cause of the injury was a trivial car accident. Not my fault. I was a passenger. Don't doubt my driving skills. You'll find references from my last job in my files. I'm available right now. If you're satisfied, give me a call. I'll be waiting. Okay. At that moment, William and Liam ran down the stairs, laughing and slapping their bare feet on the steps. "Mother, why didn't you wake us up?" Liam shouted reproachfully. "Don't you remember what day it is?" Adriana got up and grabbed the boys in an armful of them. "And what day is it?" she asked. "Well, Mom," William looked at her sternly. "You promised we would go to the water park today. Did you forget? Why are you barefoot? Put your slippers on. Then we'll wash up and have breakfast. And then we'll talk about the water park. And who's going to say hello to the guest?" "Oh, what rude boys." The children looked at Noah curiously from behind Adriana's back. "Hello," both said at the same time. "Hello," answered Noah just as curiously, staring at the children. "Noah," said their mother. "Maybe he will be replacing James soon." "What happened to Uncle James?" Liam asked. "Nothing at all. He just had some urgent business. But go back to your room and get dressed properly. In the meantime, I'll get some breakfast." The children ran upstairs again with the same noise. The cook was in charge of cooking in the house, but she didn't come until 10 o'clock to do lunch and dinner. Breakfast was always Adriana's concern, and she left for work later than the children went to school. Here Adriana slumped back in her chair. "Actually, and your first introduction." "Nice boys," Noel said thoughtfully. "Well, I won't keep you any longer. Call me, and you'd better." The man held out another business card to this number. "On this, I am always in touch." The moment when the silver Toyota left the cottage grounds, Adriana knew that Noah would be working for them. This confidence of hers was not logically explainable. The man simply inspired confidence without any rational reason. Adriana absent-mindedly flipped through the papers he'd left her with resumes and references, and wonderfully her heart felt at peace for her children and herself. Even to her father, she felt a gratitude unimaginable before. It was as if she had caught a tailwind that had been blowing from anywhere but the right direction. Ethan, after that unfortunate night, had withdrawn completely. It seemed as if he'd completely disconnected from family life. Even Noah, he continued to call James out of habit, though it was hard not to notice the striking difference between the two drivers. In the 3 months of summer that flew like a day, Ethan no longer tried, by force or word, to convince Adriana of the need for a third child. Sometimes he would disappear for a whole week and then reappear as if nothing had happened. He would dryly drop his hello and retire to his office. The children, who had never known him to pay any special attention before, did not notice the change in their father. Noah, whose face had frightened them at first, very quickly caught on. He had become not only their bodyguard, but their real nurse. Now they spent most of their free time not with Adriana, but with him. Once every 2 weeks, Noah took a day off, and the boys had to hang around the cottage, counting the hours until they met their new idol. And in September, the gray of everyday life began. Adriana's prolonged vacation was over. The vacations were over. Studies, sections, and clubs began. The way life turned out this way suited Adriana just fine. At times, she thought it would be nice if Ethan moved away from them altogether. Noah, on the other hand, would live in one of the rooms for the most valuable guests. At night, she fantasized about him sneaking into her bedroom and making love to him. A burning desire for physical intimacy with this man didn't leave her during the day either. She began to think that Noah could feel it. But the more Adriana tried to hide the signs of her infatuation in communication, the more clearly she gave away her secret feeling. Noah tried less often to catch her eye. Apparently, he was afraid of what might happen. Adriana chided herself, mentally calling her a fool. But by the middle of the first autumn month, she realized that she was finally in trouble. She also realized that if Noah reciprocated, Ethan was bound to find out about it. And neither the scars nor Noah's courage or connections would help. In spite of all the ice that blocks the couple's relationship, a husband would not allow anyone to trespass on his property, and Adriana was what he considered his property and nothing else. Adriana knew firsthand how cruel he could be to those who dared to get in his way in rain. There was a calm in her soul that began to evaporate little by little. The trap she had been trapped in had not gone anywhere. She just stopped noticing it for a while. It wasn't just Liam and William who were in danger now, but Noah as well, and she had to do something about it. She had to put an end to this endless prison of fear. Her mind began to flash like a hallucination. The most horrible ideas that made her break out in a cold sweat. Adriana was clearly aware that she was about to take the most extreme measure possible. Either she will run away to the edge of the world with her children, or no, who will they be left with if she ends up behind bars? There's got to be some other way. There has to be. Maybe ask her father for help. He probably knows more than he's saying, and is still in a position to solve such an issue. A thunderstorm broke out during the night. The Indian summer was over, and its last day decided to be remembered by people like this, with thunder and lightning across the sky, with rain sloshing on the roofs. Adriana could not sleep. She woke up, opened the window, and smoked in her bedroom. Then she ran to check on her boys. Maybe they were scared and shaking with fear, but the boys were asleep, oblivious to the storm outside the house. Happy, as long as they didn't even get a glimpse of what Adriana was imagining. But sooner or later, these walls, which she was still able to protect, would not hold the children, and they would either have to flee or defend themselves as best they could, trusting in God. After spending an absent-minded and thoughtful 5 minutes in the nursery, Adriana returned to her room and saw the phone screen turn on. A second later, the phone rang. Who needed her at 1 o'clock in the morning? Her heart twitched tensely. In her chest, Adriana picked up the phone. "Hello, Adriana." With a familiar accent in English, the voice said, and her heart. The woman completely stopped, anticipating trouble. "Jacob, excuse me for disturbing you. I don't know what time it is now, but there is news about your father. I am sorry to have to talk about them." Adriana was silent, waiting to hear the dreaded word. Dead. She shuddered in the street, rumbling so that she heard Jacob's last words more than once. "Jacob," she roused herself. I didn't understand what you just said. Michael suffered a second attack. The doctor repeated, I'm afraid he won't last much longer. Would you like to come? You'll have time to say goodbye. He has been conscious at times, and he asked me to call you. Yes, I'll leave tomorrow. Jacob, hurry up. Adriana, goodbye. How is it that just now, when Adriana needed her father, he decided to run away again? And now for good, even having suffered a heart attack. She saw him as strong and sturdy. If it were not for the chasm that lay between them, she might have admired his steadfastness and sanity. But so suddenly, at the most inopportune moment, life did break him. Adriana did not close her eyes until morning, and every 5 minutes she looked at her watch, waiting for when she could finally go to the airport. At 5 o'clock, she couldn't resist calling Noah. She asked him to take her. She wanted to spend a few minutes with him before her flight. On the way, Adriana told him not only about what had happened, but also about what might follow. And the real war within the ruling board of directors would follow. And the most dangerous player in the redistribution of property and power would be Ethan. Maybe even for sure. My father had managed to legally reissue his controlling interest, and everything now depended on who would own it. If Ethan, which Adriana now had reason to doubt, it might be for the best. He would cease to pay attention to her and the children, concentrating on his power and his prospects. But if the owner now made her feel creepy at the thought, you, Adriana, calmly said to all these revelations, Noah, don't drag yourself into a corner prematurely. Don't look so far a step, and that will always be enough. There are too many unknowns in this equation. Adriana didn't particularly understand this philosophical remark of his in her already messed up and upside-down head. But the very fact that Noah remained calm and spoke with conviction reassured her a little. I'll ask you, Noah, while I'm not here to remain especially attentive to William and Liam, that's for sure. You can count on me. I assure you, everything will be all right. Noah said it as if he were the only one in charge of the situation. It seemed to Adriana that it was not just a duty phrase, as usual to reassure a confused interlocutor, but the absolute knowledge that this is how it will be good. The woman looked at Noah with surprise. He did not change his face or turn around. His profile looked as if it had been carved by the hand of a genius sculptor in a sketch. It made the incompleteness seem particularly gorgeous. No, they must have met somewhere before. Maybe in a past life, Adriana shuddered with mixed feelings, wandering somewhere between fear and belief in a better outcome. They pulled up to the airport. Noah got a small wheeled bag from the trunk and walked Adriana to the terminal. She couldn't resist kissing him on the cheek before she said goodbye. How she wished they could fly together now. If it hadn't been for the children, she would surely have asked him to. And she knew he couldn't refuse her. But William and Liam Noah were more needed now. Somerset House greeted her with a morning chill and clear skies. Adriana had called Jacob ahead of time to arrive early at the boarding house and meet her outside her father's villa. As she approached the house with the small pool in the courtyard and the 3 palm trees, the doctor was already waiting for her. They said hello and went inside. Her father lay in bed, encased on the sides, and in the headboard with medical equipment. A young nurse was bustling around the room. When Jacob and Adriana entered, she left. My father had changed beyond recognition in the months since the last meeting. The skin on his face had become very thin, blue-black, and only his eyes were still alive. When he saw Adriana, he tried to smile, but the attempt turned out more like regret. I'll leave you to it, Jacob said quietly. Good, Adriana nodded. Once she was alone with her father, Adriana moved a chair closer to the bed and sat down. Michael pressed a button on the remote, clamped the mechanism, and the headboard rose slightly, so that they could now look at each other at the same height. It's not a good time for me to leave you, my father said. Adriana said nothing, knowing that there was no point in saying now some ridiculous phrases about how maybe it would all work out somehow. She knew it wouldn't. Her father and the doctor knew it wouldn't. Did you call Noah? Adriana shuddered. Yes, he works for us now. That's a good thing. I listened to my father for once. Just tell me, Dad, why him and why now? What's the connection between you two, anyway? Your daughter's past is your past. I don't understand. I assumed, putting a cold palm on Adriana's hand. Her father looked at her intently. I assumed that your heart would tell you. At first, Adriana wanted to yank her hand away. Even such a small hint of affection from her father was not something she was used to. I don't understand, Adriana repeated. I don't. Her father shook his head slightly. It was Mason, and it was like something exploded in Adriana's head. Is that what it is? That's why that face and those Noah mannerisms seemed so familiar. But how? How could it be? They'd buried Mason years ago. Maybe Dad is delirious. Adriana fixed her eyes on him, trying to catch anything unnatural in his gaze. But he didn't look mad at all, and he looked clear and aware of what was going on. I see, he said. It's hard to believe. I didn't believe it either when he came to my place. He thought I was behind the attempt on his life. I think you were sure of that too, though you never said so to my face. But I'm not the monster you always thought I was. Dad, wait. I suppose you can guess now who's behind the crime. Ethan. It was my mistake that was the biggest mistake of my life. I never wanted to believe it. I shunned such thoughts, assuring myself that it had been the most trivial of accidents, a coincidence of circumstances. Then I cynically decided to take advantage of that coincidence. After all, William and Liam were the Mason children. They are, aren't they? So you always knew about this? No, Ethan did a DNA test. Bastard, Dad exclaimed. A red dot flashed on the monitor behind his head. Immediately, the nurse ran into the room. A nurse walked up to Michael. It's okay, Dad said. Don't worry. Give us another minute, I've reassigned. The father continued. The controlling interest is in Liam and William. Until your majority, you are designated as the owner of the shares without the right to transfer them to third parties, including your spouse. Why would Daddy rather leave everything to that monster? It would be safer for the children. Look, you don't know everything yet, but Mason will tell you about it. It's more complicated than you can imagine. It's gonna be tough for a while. I know you're very strong, and I know Mason won't leave you with the kids. You have to trust him. No matter what happens, trust him. Do you hear me? I hear you, Daddy. I hear you. That's my daughter. That's better. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The red dot on the monitor flashed again, and something shrill beeped. Dad loosened his arms, Adriana his palm, and looked up. His eyes darted from side to side like they were reading a book, and after a few seconds they were frozen in place. It was as if they were covered with a film of ice. The nurse rushed back into the room. This time her father was unable to object. The girl took a syringe from a box on the bedside table and deftly injected Michael. She stood, watching his face for a moment. Then she pressed the blue button on the wall by the front door and looked at Adriana in confusion. She had already figured it out. 3 minutes later, 2 men entered the room. They put Michael on a gurney, and they drove him out of the house. Adriana ran out after them, her eyes fixed on the ambulance that had just sped away. She met Jacob's gloomy gaze. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Hot tears crawled down Adriana's cheeks. In Florida, we had to stay 3 more days because the contract with the boarding house Michael was obliged to bury in the local cemetery. That was his style. No sentimentality, even in such a matter as his posthumous memory. He was more concerned not with lying next to his wife's grave, but with making sure that his inheritance went to a worthy and reliable person. Adriana, of course, was not reliable. That was why this clever move with the grandchildren was a way to secure the stock for a long time against rash actions on the part of the daughter. To her, they were more of a burden than a good asset. The father assumed that with the passage of time, a lot of things would fall into place in Adriana's mind. From his point of view, in the right place. The funeral was attended by a lawyer, and 2 other people Adriana had seen for the first time in her life. All legal matters relating to the inheritance were settled right at the site of the action. At the insistence of the lawyer, were placed in a safe deposit box, where her father had long kept some more documents, and already frayed nerves Adriana. They had been completely shaken before the flight, when she had tried unsuccessfully to call her sons or Mason from the morning until lunchtime. Ethan did not show up for the funeral, though he must have been informed by now that Michael was gone, which meant that he was occupied with something more important to him. Had the war already begun? Adriana never dared to ask the lawyer what would happen if her sons didn't live to adulthood. Even the fleeting thought of it caused her unbearable pain. From now on, the boys were in danger, and all hope remained in Mason, in the trust to which Michael, now deceased, had insisted. For the last 2 days, Adriana had not slept a wink, and the closer she flew to the capital, the greater her fear became. At the airport, Adriana ordered a cab, and without stopping to call, she finally made it home. There was an unaccustomed bustle in the cottage grounds, where cars were piled up all over the courtyard, with their wheels on the lawns and flower beds with late blooming flowers. Some people with wires sticking out of their ears sauntered around, peering intently at each newcomer Adriana also met as a guest. They asked for papers and checked for weapons. Then they apologized dryly and let her into the house. She was greeted by an excited, disheveled Ethan. "What's going on here?" More and more pale by the minute, Adriana asked. Ethan gestured for her to follow him. They secluded themselves in the fire room, where there were no guards or servants. "Where did you find it?" nervously blurted out the husband of this no. "What?" It took Adriana a while to realize who Ethan was talking about, because after the last conversation with her father had had time to get used to the fact that it was really him, Mason. The driver almost shouted her husband. "James quit, and you bailed. Have you forgotten the solution to this question on me?" "I remember. But why him? Who recommended him to you?" "His father." "What's going on? Where are the children?" "I have to see them." "Then I understand." Ethan flopped down in a chair by the fireplace and lit a cigarette. "What is clear?" Adriana got angry. "Where are William and Liam?" "I don't know." Ethan threw over his shoulder. "How can you not know? What does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with Noah?" Adriana almost said his real name, even though he was the one who kidnapped your kids. "What?" "How he silently drove them to school yesterday morning. And since then, there has been no news of him or the children." Adriana's mind was completely confused. She, too, sank into an armchair and stared at the fire in the fireplace. Suddenly, the right idea flashed through her mind, as it seemed to her. What if that was how Mason had protected William with Liam? Or was there no such thing? Or was she mentally comparing Ethan and Mason to each other? The former might well have been the reason for the trio's disappearance, if somehow he found out who was hiding behind Noah's identity. But Mason seemed head and shoulders above Adriana in this comparison. He was in control of the situation long before he found himself casually in their house. He should have anticipated Ethan's possible moves and preempted them before he could think of any plan. But why would he do that? Adriana asked. "Kidnap the children and made no demands?" "No, not yet. Waiting for the call. I suppose if he does call, you're the only one he'll put your phone on a wiretap. Right now, you need to go to my office. They will explain to you how to behave." The wait dragged on into the evening. Adriana periodically fell into oblivion because she did not sleep. For the 3rd day in a row, it had become too much for her. She tried to imagine what her plan would have looked like if she had been in Mason's shoes, but she couldn't think of anything that made sense. Ethan, however she saw it, seemed an irresistible figure. Mason was bound to call. There was no doubt about it. He would ask for a ransom, as befits the role of a kidnapper. Most likely, Adriana would have to deliver the money herself, and then somehow he'd intercept her and they'd end up together. In order to finally clarify all the nuances of the circumstances. But the question was, if Mason asked for too much money, would Ethan go along with it? It was unlikely that the husband was interested in the lives and safety of the children. He needed the stock to become the absolute master of the agency. Was he willing to sacrifice the money now, with the vague hope that he would have something to gain in 11 years? Her thoughts and the recurring dream. A long-awaited phone call interrupted. The three men in the office, including Ethan, roused and fidgeted, giving Adriana some indecipherable sign. She picked up the phone. Yes, her voice trembled slightly. Adriana heard the phone ring. Her heart was relieved. It was Mason's voice. "I'm listening with confidence," Adriana said. "Who it is? No, I'll tell you. And you listen carefully and don't interrupt." Adriana said nothing to this. "Good," the voice continued. "You have had plenty of time to start collecting money, because you have been waiting for the call and understood that money will be needed. So let's not drag this problem out. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. sharp you must come with the money to a specified place. I will send you the coordinates. There you will receive further instructions. You must be alone in the car. No tails. No police. Ransom amount, $1 million. There will be no haggling. Numbers and times are final. Otherwise, you know what awaits you." That's the end of the line. To Adriana's great surprise, Ethan did not say a word about the amount of money. Apparently, he had prepared it in advance, as the next morning a huge suitcase was placed on the back seat of her car. Of course, no one showed Adriana the money itself. The suitcase could have been anything. No one really explained anything. They just put a bulletproof vest on her and told her to go to the place and do what the kidnapper said. Ethan himself left the night before and did not appear until Adriana's departure. Adriana checked for the 100th time to see if her phone was charged. She put it in front of her on the dashboard of the car and mentally prayed to Mason and herself, wishing her luck. She put her foot down on the gas pedal. The highway was unfamiliarly deserted. She could have accelerated and reached the destination in half an hour. But Adriana knew she had to keep to the rules. There was a reason Mason had called that time. She could hardly contain herself. So badly she wanted to see the children and explain herself to the suddenly resurrected loved one from her past. Adriana did not notice her tail behind her, though she was sure that she was followed on her heels. Ethan wouldn't give up a dime for nothing. And it wasn't even about the money. He didn't care about them, and in the challenge that he'd been made by no one in particular. And if Ethan could have known the truth, he wouldn't have been so cocky. Mason must have had a backup plan. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken such an obvious risk. Now the highway ended, and Adriana turned onto a secondary road. A black SUV flashed in the rearview mirror with potholes and puddles from the rain that had fallen overnight, and yet there was a tail. And there was only 4 kilometers to go. A narrow one-lane bridge loomed up ahead, and right behind it was an intersection. When Adriana passed the bridge, a truck pulled up behind her on her right and blocked the road with its carcass. To get across the river. What else could the pursuers do here? There was no way. Just like that, Adriana grinned to herself. The road turned sharply to the left, and about 100 meters around the bend she saw a familiar car, a silver Toyota. It was the very spot where she was to be met for new instructions. Adriana slowed down and pulled over to the curb, a little behind the Toyota. She got out of the car, looked around carefully. She listened. The silence was broken only by the quiet rustling in the leaves that hadn't fully fallen off the roadside forest. The door of the Toyota opened, and Mason looked out. He waved. Adriana almost ran toward him, forgetting the suitcase with the money. Mason gestured for her to go to the opposite door and get in the car. Adriana was confused. She didn't know how to behave under such unusual circumstances. First of all, she wanted to see the children and hear Mason's words confirming her hunch about a prearranged plan to protect them. But it could have gone either way. What if this was all just her fantasy? What if her father was mistaken again, too, believing Mason's alleged appearance to him? Did Adriana's whole feminine essence protest this? No, you can deceive the mind, but you cannot deceive the heart. She got in the car and looked at Mason expectantly. His face was serious and unflappable. "You have to trust me," he said, without turning in her direction. "I promised to protect the children." "That's exactly what I did." Adriana didn't even notice how they suddenly switched to you from the first second. "I know, Mason," she blurted out. The man turned around. Joy flashed in his eyes, but he restrained himself from feeling too much at that moment. "Michael?" he asked. "He had told me everything." "Well, not exactly everything. He left most of the story to you. Are we going or waiting for someone?" "I want to see the children." "Yes, just a minute." At that moment, Adriana's car pulled onto the road and overtook the Toyota, scattering gravel under its wheels. Next, Adriana looked at Mason in bewilderment. "There's money in there," she said in a low voice. "Don't worry, if there is any. I very much doubt it. It won't go anywhere. My man will divert the tail. He's a professional racer. Don't worry about him." The truck must have cleared the road by now. "Let's get moving." "Where are we going?" "We're going the other way. I'll explain it to you when we get there. In the meantime, throw away the phone and take off that stupid vest. No one's going to shoot you." Adriana did as Mason said. He pressed on the gas, and after driving another mile, turned onto a forest road. They drove through the woods for about 40 minutes until they stopped at a small clearing surrounded by tall pines and a long ditch with black swamp water over a bridge spanning the ditch. In 3 logs, they crossed from the outskirts to the barely visible path, which began here. The thicket of the walk took another 15 minutes. All the way they were silent, thinking each about something different. At last a log hut appeared in front of them. What kind of huts do hunters and jagers usually stay in? It was a sturdy one, with one window and a low 2-step porch. Liam and William were already meeting them in the house. They immediately threw themselves into Adriana's arms, and the latter, weeping and laughing with happiness, kissed them and mumbled something. Thanks to God for this still unobvious outcome. As darkness began to fall and the excitement of the latest events subsided somewhat, Adriana put the boys, happy with their adventures in the woods, to bed. Before that, they spent an hour telling her about their adventures with Uncle Noah, and that he had even allowed them to skip school. They liked it as much in that lost, among the firs and pines, as they had recently liked it in Dubai. Like a sponge, they soaked up everything the world had to offer, huge, full of revelations and mysteries. While Adriana enjoyed her time with the boys, Mason was arded in the tiny kitchen, cooking a late supper. The unfamiliar aromas of a mixture of stale leaves, tarred kerosene, and fried fish wafted through the room, divided in two by a simple curtain. Adriana couldn't wait to hear the most important thing missing from Mason's story. When the children fell asleep, she pulled back the curtains separating their cubbyhole from the other half. She walked over to Mason and embraced him, resting her face against his broad chest. He responded with a similarly gentle embrace, and so they stood there for a minute without moving or uttering a word. How could it be? Adriana broke the silence. "Why didn't you show up sooner? We buried you. Where have you been all this time?" "Let's sit down," Mason suggested, "and I'll tell you everything." They sat down. They ate. I didn't feel like cooking at all. Mason only did it to fill the pause while he wanted to talk about the main thing, which was what he'd started this whole conspiracy for. He started first. I could not appear, for my face was a shapeless mess of blood. It was in this very hut that I licked my wounds for 3 months. This was my grandfather's cabin. He worked here as a gamekeeper, and then he went to live here all summer, as long as he had strength. Wandered the familiar trails and fixed the hut. Often took me with him for a week or so. He had a pretty good first aid kit here, with everything I needed. Thanks to her, I somehow made it. What happened on the river? Adriana asked. At the river? Mason sighed heavily. It had been a mystery to me for a long time, too. It was already dark. The day my friends and I celebrated my first vacation, I decided to go for a swim. The weather was sweltering all day, and it wasn't getting any cooler towards evening. I swam to the middle of the river and was about to go back when I felt something grab my legs and pull me to the bottom. I'm not a bad swimmer, and God hadn't given me much strength. I tried to get to the bottom of the river, but I couldn't help myself, so I decided to find out what the monster was up to. I filled my chest with air and dove in. In the dark water, I could distinguish only a muddy shadow, not looking like a fish at all. I knew it was a man, and if it was, I could fight him back, whoever he was. A close-range struggle ensued. I could distinguish him clearly enough by now. The man turned out to be a scuba diver. I managed to pull the mouthpiece out of his mouth, and he rushed to the surface. While we were struggling, I was carried far away by the current from where my friends and I had settled. I was 200 meters away from the shore. I was exhausted from there and sat down to catch my breath. I began to think who and why needed to kill me this way. It could not have been some underwater maniac attacking with a scuba diver at night on careless swimmers. Though I couldn't rule that out either, it seemed more realistic that it had something to do with you and your father. I didn't want to believe that, but that was what logic told me. I hadn't had time to catch my breath before I was attacked again from behind. This time, a strong arm tried to strangle me. We fumbled for a minute before I lost consciousness. I woke up in the water, in the middle of the river again. I don't know how I didn't get drowned as the current carried me away. With incredible effort, I made it back to shore. I couldn't feel my body, touched it with my hands, and realized that something unimaginable had happened to it. Who had done this to me? I couldn't remember. Apparently, my face had been disfigured. While I was passed out, they obviously wanted to kill me and make it impossible to find out my identity if my corpse was found for a long time. The fact that I survived seemed like a miracle. "Can we go outside?" Adriana asked. When Mason paused in his story, I wanted to have a smoke. I can't imagine how Ethan could do such a thing. "Yes, let's go. I want to get some air too." They went out and settled on the porch. Adriana lit a cigarette, so he asked Mason Michael and told you about it. "Yes, I can imagine how scared you were about Liam and William. I was sure you would protect them." Anyway, Mason went back to the story. "In 3 months, I'd changed a lot of things. Of course, I knew that to go up against an entire corporation alone would surely be to condemn myself to death. But I couldn't let these people get away with it either. When my face somehow healed, having made me completely unrecognizable, the first thing I did was go to my friend. He was the only one I could trust. He helped me with money, with clothes. He put me in touch with the right people, people close to the power structures, but leading their own game were people of ideas. You couldn't buy them. Their opportunities were limited, but still they did not refuse to help me. This whole story unfolded for a very long time. With the utmost caution and conspiracy, we still managed to develop a more or less workable plan. Only it wasn't the attempted murder that had to be dug up. 2 years later, there was not a single figure involved in the crime, not a single piece of evidence. But on the side of the agency's financial machinations, we could get a pretty good lead here, especially after Michael officially retired and turned Ethan over to Ethan. He'd lost all caution. So much so that there was enough to arrest him, that there was enough to go around. Our plan was about to be completed when suddenly something went wrong. There was a reshuffle within this unofficial organization, which was investigating outside the government. Familiar people began to leave. In their place, there were new people who I could not trust to the same extent. But a lot of material had accumulated. I just had to find a way to use it effectively. That took another 4 years. I went to see Michael in Florida when I was already desperate. It was a spontaneous and impatient impulse. I wanted to see him face to face. I wanted to see the man who I thought had started this whole 7-year mess. It was a risk I was taking. The whole operation could have gone wrong. My nerves were not iron, just lucky. Most importantly, your father opened my eyes to the truth of the situation. That day, everything finally fell into place. Michael decided to help me himself. The investigative machine was finally up and running. All I had to do was to throw irrefutable facts into its furnace. That's when the question of your safety and the safety of our children came up. And then you know all about it. About the kids. How did you know? I figured it out the day you were in the maternity ward. I was there. And then a simple DNA test. It wasn't much of a surprise. So what do we do now? Now that's it. I think behind us this night will finally be put to rest. At this second, searches are going on at your house and at all the branches of the agency. Neither Ethan nor anyone involved in the crimes one way or another will escape punishment. You can be sure of that. So Adriana couldn't believe that this was all going to end anytime soon. So tomorrow will already be free and clear and have our whole lives ahead of us. Real life as you and I originally saw it. This was the road to their new life. And tomorrow, they will take their first step on it. All together, Adriana, Mason, Liam, and William. And nothing else would mar their happiness. No matter how things work out with the agency, they will find their place in life. They have found each other forever, after going through a lot of troubles and trials. And that is their greatest strength, which nothing else can defeat.